The alarm on my wrist device buzzed twice before I even opened my eyes. 2 buzzes meant one thing on this ship. Someone important wanted me in the Grand Hall. Right now, no delay. My name is Ethan Marsh. I am a soldier of Earth, and I was standing on the deck of an alien warship, wearing a uniform that did not belong there, surrounded by people who did not want me there either. I pulled on my jacket and walked through the curved metal hallways of the Velkaran flagship. The walls glowed a soft blue, and the air smelled like burnt metal and something sweet, like flowers left too long in water. Every alien I passed stared at me the way you would stare at a stray animal that had wandered into a palace. I did not blame them. 3 years ago, my kind and theirs were still trying to destroy each other. Now we were supposed to be partners. Peace does not erase memory. It only pushes it under the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The Grand Hall doors opened without a sound. Inside, dozens of Velkaran nobles stood in a wide circle, dressed in silver robes that shimmered like water under moonlight. At the center of the room, on a raised platform, sat Princess Zareth Velkora, heir to the Velkaran dominion. She was young for a ruler, maybe my age, with pale violet skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. She had a presence that filled the room before she even spoke a word. I had seen her from a distance before, during ceremonies and formal greetings, but I had never stood this close. "Ah," she said, her voice smooth and cold, like ice sliding across glass. "The human has decided to join us." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the crowd. I kept my face still and walked forward, stopping a respectful distance from the platform, and gave a short bow, the kind my commanding officer had trained me to give. "Princess," I said, "you asked for me." "I did not ask," she said. "I ordered. There is a difference, though I imagine your species struggles with such distinctions." More laughter. I felt my jaw tighten, but I said nothing. Silence is a weapon too, and sometimes it cuts deeper than words. She rose from her seat and walked down the steps of the platform, circling me slowly, the way a hunter studies something it has not decided whether to eat. "Do you know why I called you here, soldier?" she asked. "No, princess." "Curiosity," she said. "I have heard stories about your people, about your so-called victories in the war. I wanted to see, up close, what kind of creature could possibly stand against the might of the Dominion fleet." She stopped in front of me and looked me up and down, the way someone examines a piece of furniture they are not sure they want to buy. "You are smaller than I expected," she said. "Slower, I would guess. No natural weapons, no armored skin. Tell me, Ethan Marsh, how did your kind manage to survive this long? Luck, or did we simply not try hard enough?" The room went quiet, waiting for my reaction. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, waiting to see if the human would break, or beg, or shrink. I did none of those things. I only smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but I saw her eyes narrow when she noticed it. She was not used to being smiled at when she expected fear. "Something amuses you," she said, her voice sharper now. "No, princess," I said. "I was only thinking about something that happened a few years ago. It is not important." "I decide what is important on this ship," she snapped. "Tell me what you find so funny." I looked at her for a long moment. Somewhere behind my ribs, a memory stirred, one I had buried under years of silence and orders not to speak. The rush of cold air in a cockpit, the scream of alarms, a sky full of burning lights that used to be ships, ships that belonged to her people, ships that were part of the very fleet her father had built his power on. I said nothing about that. Instead, I gave the safest answer I had. "I was only remembering an old mission, princess. Nothing that concerns the court." She studied me for a long moment, clearly unsatisfied, but she let it go. Princesses do not chase answers from soldiers they consider beneath them. She turned back toward her platform, waving a hand toward me like she was brushing away a piece of dust. "You may return to your post," she said. "I have seen enough of you for one day." I bowed again and turned to leave. As I walked toward the doors, I heard her voice one last time, loud enough for the whole hall to hear. "Humans," she said, addressing her court now. "Not me. Soft-skinned creatures who got lucky in a war they should have lost. Do not mistake their survival for strength. A rabbit that escapes a hunter is still only a rabbit." The doors closed behind me, before I had to hear the laughter that followed. I walked back through the halls slower than before, my mind somewhere else entirely. I was not angry. Anger would have been easy. What I felt was something quieter, something heavier. She had no idea who she had just insulted. 3 years ago, before the peace treaty, before any of this, I was a pilot assigned to a small strike group, protecting a human evacuation convoy, near a system called Kess Reach. We were outnumbered, badly. The Velkaran Third Armada, one of the largest fleets in their entire military, had cornered us there, blocking every path out. My commanding officers gave the order that no one wanted to hear. Hold the line as long as possible, so the convoy ships could escape. It was not expected to work. It was expected to be the last thing most of us ever did. I do not like to think about what happened next, not because I am ashamed of it, but because some memories do not get lighter with time. They only get heavier the longer you carry them. What I can say is this: when the fighting ended, the armada that had trapped us was gone. Not retreated, gone. And the convoy made it home. The official reports called it a turning point in the war. They gave medals to people who were not there, and quiet silence to the ones who were. My name was buried in a classified file somewhere, locked away for reasons that had more to do with politics than truth. The Velkaran people knew that something happened at Kess Reach. They knew they lost a fleet that should have been unstoppable. What they did not know was who had been in the cockpit that led the strike that broke it. I reached my quarters, a small metal room barely large enough for a bed and a desk, and sat down heavily on the edge of the bunk. Through the narrow window, I could see the stars sliding by, calm and endless, completely unaware of the storm sitting quietly inside my chest. A soft chime rang from my communicator. I answered it, and the face of Colonel Grace Whitfield appeared on the small screen, her expression sharp as always. "I heard about the hall," she said, without any greeting. "The princess gave you a hard time." "It was nothing I have not handled before," I said. "That is not what I am worried about," Grace said. "I am worried about what happens if she keeps digging. She does not like being embarrassed, and something tells me she is not going to let this go." "She does not know anything," I said. "The Kess Reach files are sealed." "Sealed does not mean invisible," Grace said. "You know how these things work. One loose thread, one curious officer, and the whole thing starts to unravel. If she finds out who you really are before we are ready for that conversation, it could undo 3 years of careful peace." I rubbed my eyes, suddenly tired, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "So what do you want me to do? Disappear? Transfer out?" "No," Grace said. "I want you to be careful. Keep your head down. Do your duty, and let the past stay buried a little longer. We are not ready for the truth to come out yet, not while the treaty is still this fragile." I nodded, even though something in my chest did not agree with her plan. Some truths do not stay buried forever. Some truths have a way of clawing their way back to the surface, no matter how deep you try to bury them. The communicator screen went dark, and I sat alone in my quarters for a long while, listening to the quiet hum of the ship around me. Somewhere else on this same vessel, in a chamber lined with silver and blue light, Princess Zareth Velcora was already speaking to her chief intelligence officer, a sharp-eyed Velkaran named Threll, giving him an order that would change everything. "Find out everything you can about the human called Ethan Marsh," she said. "There is something about him I do not understand, and I intend to understand it." Threll bowed low. "As you command, Princess." Neither of them knew yet how far that single order would travel, or how much it would cost before the truth finally came to light. I did not know it either, lying awake in my small metal room, staring at the stars sliding silently past my window. All I knew was that the smile I gave her in that hall had planted a seed. And seeds, given enough time and enough curiosity, always grow into something much bigger than anyone expects. Outside my window, the stars kept moving, indifferent to all of it, the way stars always are. Somewhere out there, past the edge of what any sensor could reach, the wreckage of a fleet still drifted through empty space, a graveyard that only a handful of people alive still remembered building. I closed my eyes that night knowing one simple thing: the princess wanted answers, and sooner or later she was going to get them. Threll did not sleep that night. He rarely did when the princess gave him a task with that particular tone in her voice. The tone that meant failure was not an option he wanted to consider. He sat in a small dark room, lit only by the glow of a dozen data screens, each one filled with scrolling records pulled from every archive his access could reach. Human military files were notoriously difficult to break into, layered with encryption that changed faster than his best decoders could track. But Threll had spent decades learning patience, and patience was exactly what this task required. He started with the simple things: service records, assignment history, the basic shape of a life that any soldier leaves behind in official paperwork. Ethan Marsh, born on a farming colony called Del Hollow, enlisted at 19, trained as a strike craft pilot, transferred through several units before landing in the diplomatic liaison program 3 years ago. It was a clean record, too clean, Threll thought. Soldiers who fought in the war usually carried scars in their files, commendations, disciplinary notes, something that showed the shape of a life lived through conflict. This file read like someone had smoothed over every rough edge, like a stone worn down by a river that had been running for a very long time. He kept digging. Deep in a supply requisition log, buried under years of routine paperwork, he found something strange. A single entry, dated during the war, requesting a replacement uniform with a service ribbon attached. A ribbon that, according to every official record, did not exist yet at that time. The ribbon was for something called the Kess Reach Commendation. Threll frowned at his screen. He had never heard of Kess Reach before, not in any official history he had studied. He searched the term through every database he could access, and found almost nothing. A single line in an old astronomical chart, marking the location as a minor system near the old border, nothing more. That kind of silence was not an accident. Silence that complete had to be built on purpose, brick by careful brick, by people who wanted a story to stay buried. He brought his findings to the princess the next morning, standing before her in a private chamber, away from the noise of the court. "I found very little, princess," he admitted. "The human's record appears clean, almost suspiciously so. But there is one strange detail. A commendation ribbon, connected to a location called Kess Reach. I cannot find any official record of what happened there." Zareth's eyes sharpened at the name. "Kess Reach," she repeated slowly, testing the sound of it. "That name is familiar to me, though I could not tell you why." "Perhaps someone in the court would remember," Threll suggested. "Someone who served during the war." Zareth nodded slowly, already thinking ahead. "Bring me the names of every officer still serving on this ship who fought in the war. I want to speak with them personally." Over the following days, I noticed small changes around me that I did not understand at first. Officers who used to ignore me completely began watching me from across rooms, their expressions unreadable. A few of the older Velkaran crew members, the ones with faded scars and slower steps, started giving me strange, careful looks whenever I passed them in the halls, as if they were trying to solve a puzzle just by staring at my face. I mentioned it to Grace during one of our regular check-ins, sitting across from her in the small briefing room we used when we needed privacy. "They are looking into you," Grace said, not sounding surprised at all. "I warned you this might happen." "I have not done anything," I said. "I have followed every rule since I stepped onto this ship." "It is not about what you have done," Grace said. "It is about what you did before you ever stepped onto this ship." The princess is not the type to let an insult go unanswered, even one as small as a smile she did not understand. "So what do we do?" Grace leaned back in her chair, thinking for a long moment before answering. "We wait. We watch. If they find something concrete, we deal with it then. Until that happens, you keep doing your job exactly the way you have been doing it. No mistakes, no slip-ups. Understood?" I nodded, though the weight sitting in my chest did not lift, no matter how many times I told myself everything would be fine. 3 days later, everything changed. I was walking through the lower training deck, a wide-open space where Velkaran soldiers practiced hand-to-hand combat drills, when I noticed a group of older officers standing near the far wall, watching a training match without much interest. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered Velkaran, with a long scar running down the side of his face, was staring directly at me. His name, I would later learn, was Commander Vosk, a veteran who had served through the entire war and somehow survived battles that killed most of the people around him. I gave him a polite nod as I passed, the kind of small gesture you give a stranger to avoid tension. He did not return it. Instead, he stepped forward, blocking my path entirely. "You," he said, his voice low and rough. I know your face. I do not believe we have met, Commander, I said carefully. Not your face exactly, he said, studying me the way a man studies something he is trying very hard to remember. Something about you, the way you walk. The way you carry yourself, like a man who has looked at death and decided he was not impressed by it. I said nothing, unsure where this conversation was heading, unsure if I even wanted to know. I served under Admiral Korath, Voss continued, his voice growing quieter, almost distant. Do you know that name? My stomach tightened, though I kept my face as still as I could manage. I have heard it mentioned, I said carefully, in old briefings. He commanded the Third Armada, Vosk said. 12,000 souls under his command, the pride of the Dominion fleet, sent to trap a small group of human ships near a system barely worth naming on any chart. It should have been simple, a slaughter, over before it truly began. He paused, his eyes distant now, seeing something I could not. It was not simple, he said. Something came through that battle, something small and fast that should not have been able to do what it did. By the time the fighting ended, the Third Armada was gone, all 12,000 souls, Admiral Korath included. The training deck around us seemed to grow quieter, though I knew it was only my own mind narrowing everything down to this single conversation. I am sorry for your loss, Commander, I said, my voice steady, despite everything happening beneath the surface. Vosk studied me for a long, heavy moment, and for just a second, I thought I saw something behind his eyes, a flicker of recognition he was not ready to speak aloud. There is a report, he said finally, sealed by your government, that mentions a single pilot who led the final strike that day. No name attached, only a designation, a call sign. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping even lower. Ashfall, he said. Does that mean anything to you, soldier? The word hit me like cold water down my spine. Ashfall had been my call sign during the war, given to me by a squadron leader who thought it fit the way I flew, quiet and controlled, until the moment everything around me burned. I kept my expression as calm as I could manage, though I felt my pulse hammering against my ribs. I am afraid that means nothing to me, Commander, I said. Perhaps you are thinking of someone else. Vosk stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment, long enough that I genuinely did not know which way this conversation would break. Then, slowly, he stepped aside, allowing me to pass. Perhaps, he said quietly, perhaps I am simply an old man chasing ghosts. I walked away from him as calmly as I could, though my legs felt unsteady beneath me, and I did not look back until I had turned the corner into the next hallway. That night, I reported the conversation to Grace, watching her expression grow more serious with every word. They are getting close, she said, once I finished. Closer than I expected this soon. What do we do now? I asked. Grace was quiet for a long moment, staring at the small metal table between us, like it held answers neither of us could see. There may come a point, she said slowly, where the truth is safer out in the open than buried underground. Secrets have a way of becoming more dangerous the longer they are kept, especially when the wrong people start asking the right questions. Are you saying I should tell her? I am saying, Grace said carefully, that decision may not belong to us for much longer. Vosk knows something. Threll is digging. And Princess Zareth does not strike me as the type of person who gives up once she catches the scent of something worth chasing. Meanwhile, on the upper decks of the ship, Zareth sat alone in her private chamber, staring at a small data screen, where Threll had compiled everything they had gathered so far. A ribbon that should not exist, a location almost erased from every record, a veteran commander who had gone quiet and pale after a short conversation with a human soldier he refused to explain further. She did not have the full picture yet, but she could feel its shape forming somewhere just beyond her reach, like a shadow moving behind frosted glass, and something deep inside her, some instinct, sharpened by years of court politics and careful observation, told her that whatever this shadow turned out to be, it was going to change everything she thought she understood about the war, about her father's fleet, and about the quiet human soldier who had dared to smile at her in front of her entire court. She closed the data screen and sat in the dark for a long while, thinking. Somewhere across the ship, I lay awake in my small quarters, staring at the same stars I always stared at when sleep refused to come, feeling the walls around my old secret beginning, ever so slowly, to crack. The following week brought a formal gathering that no one on the ship could avoid, not even me. It was called the Remembrance Assembly, a yearly tradition among the Velcaran military, where the names of the fallen were read aloud before the entire crew, a ritual meant to honor those lost during the long war between our two peoples. I had never attended one before. As a human liaison, I was technically allowed to stay in my quarters during the ceremony, and every year before this one, I had done exactly that, quietly avoiding a room full of grief that was not mine to share. But this year, Grace insisted I attend. "If you hide," she told me, "it will look like you have something to hide. Stand in the open. Let them see you have nothing to fear." So I stood near the back of the great assembly hall, dressed in my formal uniform, surrounded by hundreds of Velcaran soldiers, all of them silent, all of them waiting. Princess Zareth stood at the front of the room, dressed in deep silver robes, holding a long scroll in her hands. Beside her stood Commander Vosk, his face unreadable, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the back of the room where I stood. The ceremony began with a slow, mournful song sung by a small choir positioned near the high windows, their voices rising and falling in a language I did not fully understand, though the sorrow in it needed no translation. Then Zareth began to read names. She read for a long time. Hundreds of names, some belonging to soldiers who died recently in border skirmishes, others belonging to names decades old, kept alive only through this yearly ritual of memory. The room grew heavier with each name spoken, the weight of loss settling over everyone present like a physical thing. Then she reached a section of the scroll that made her pause. "The Third Armada," she said, her voice steady but quieter than before. "Lost at the system-designated Kess Reach during the final year of the war." A ripple moved through the crowd, a collective intake of breath from the older soldiers who remembered exactly what those words meant. I felt my own chest tighten, standing perfectly still at the back of the room, forcing my face to remain calm, while every instinct told me to leave. Zareth read the names slowly, one after another, 12,000 names that stretched on longer than any other section of the ceremony. It took nearly 20 minutes. I stood through every second of it, listening to name after name after name, each one a life that had ended because of a mission I had flown. I had not attended a ceremony like this before. I had not truly understood, until that moment, the full size of what had happened at Kess Reach. In the official reports I had read over the years, it was always summarized in cold, distant language. Enemy fleet neutralized, objective achieved, convoy preserved, numbers on a page, nothing more. Standing in that room, listening to 12,000 names read aloud one by one, the weight of it finally reached me in a way it never had before. When the reading finally ended, Zareth rolled the scroll closed and looked out over the crowd, her eyes eventually finding me at the back of the room. For a long moment, our eyes met, and I saw something in her expression I had not seen before. Not anger, not suspicion. Something closer to grief, raw and unguarded, before she quickly masked it behind the composed expression of a ruler in front of her people. The ceremony ended shortly after, and the crowd began filing out slowly, quietly, the way people move when they are still carrying something heavy inside them. I turned to leave as well, but a voice stopped me before I reached the door. "Soldier." I turned to find Commander Vosk standing a short distance away, his expression serious. "The princess wishes to speak with you," he said. "Privately, now." My heart sank, though I kept my face composed. "Of course, Commander." He led me through a series of quiet hallways I had never walked before, deeper into the private sections of the ship reserved for the royal family. Eventually we reached a small chamber, with a single window overlooking the endless stretch of stars outside, where Zareth stood alone, still dressed in her ceremonial robes, staring out at the darkness. "Leave us," she said to Vosk, without turning around. He hesitated for a moment, glancing at me with an expression I could not quite read, before bowing and stepping out, the door sliding shut behind him with a quiet hiss. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Zareth continued staring out the window, her reflection faint against the glass, mixed with the distant light of stars that had watched over battles neither of us could ever fully forget. "Do you know what today was?" she asked finally, still not turning around. "The Remembrance Assembly," I said. "A ceremony to honor the fallen."
"Yes,"
she said. "Every year, I stand in that hall and read those names. Every year, it grows a little heavier, though I could not tell you why. Perhaps because every year, I understand a little more of what those names actually cost. She turned to face me now, her storm-colored eyes studying my face with an intensity I had not felt from her before. Commander Vosk believes you know something about Kesreach, she said. He will not tell me exactly what, only that something about your presence disturbs him deeply. Threll has found strange gaps in your records, gaps that should not exist for a simple liaison officer. And when I read those 12,000 names today, I watched your face, soldier. I watched you carry something heavy through every single one of them. I said nothing, my mind racing through every possible response, weighing honesty against the careful instructions Grace had given me. I am going to ask you something, Zareth continued, stepping closer, and I want you to understand that whatever answer you give me, I will know if you are lying. I have spent my entire life learning to read the truth on the faces of people who wish to hide it from me. She stopped only a few steps away now, close enough that I could see the exhaustion hidden beneath her composed expression, close enough to see that the mockery she wore in front of her court was a mask over something far more complicated underneath. What happened at Kesreach? She asked quietly. And what do you have to do with it? The question hung in the air between us, heavier than anything either of us had said before. I felt the careful walls I had built over 3 years of silence beginning to strain under the weight of her stare, and for the first time since arriving on this ship, I genuinely did not know what I was going to say next. Princess, I said slowly, choosing each word with great care. There are things about the war that remain classified, even to me. Matters that are not mine to discuss without proper authorization. It was not a lie, though it was not the full truth either, and I could see in her expression that she recognized exactly what I was doing. You are protecting something, she said, her voice sharpening slightly. Or someone. I am following orders, I said, the same as any soldier. She studied me for a long, tense moment, and I genuinely believed she might push further, might demand an answer I was not yet permitted to give. Instead, something in her expression shifted, softening slightly, though the sharpness never fully left her eyes. My father commanded that fleet from a distance, she said quietly, almost to herself. He never spoke of it afterward. Not once. I grew up hearing whispers among the older officers, fragments of a story no one would tell me completely. All I ever knew was that something happened at Kesreach that broke something inside the Dominion, something that never fully healed. She looked back out at the stars, her voice growing quieter still. I used to imagine it as some great and terrible battle, she said. Fleets clashing across the void, brilliant tactics, overwhelming force meeting overwhelming force. A story worthy of the losses it caused. She turned back to me, her eyes searching my face again. But that is not what happened, is it? She said. It was not really a question. I did not answer, though my silence answered for me more clearly than any words could have. Zareth nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already suspected but had not wanted to fully believe. You may return to your quarters, soldier, she said finally, turning back toward the window. I have not finished with this matter, but I find I am not ready to hear the rest of it tonight. I bowed and left the chamber as quickly as I reasonably could, my pulse still racing as the door slid shut behind me. Commander Vosk was waiting outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching me, with an expression that had shifted from suspicion into something closer to quiet understanding. She is closer to the truth than she realizes, he said as I passed him. I stopped, meeting his eyes directly. And you, Commander? How close are you? He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face the way he had on the training deck days earlier. I was there, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. At Kesreach, I was a young officer, serving aboard one of the support cruisers, stationed at the edge of the formation. I watched the main line collapse from a distance I will never forget. I watched something small and fast tear through defenses that should have been unbreakable, moving in ways that made no logical sense, striking exactly where our formation was weakest, again and again, until there was nothing left to strike. He looked at me directly now, his expression unreadable. I have spent 3 years wondering what kind of pilot could fly like that, he said, wondering if I would ever meet them, and what I would feel if I did. And now? I asked quietly. Vosk was silent for a long moment, his eyes tracing over my face, as if searching for confirmation he was not yet ready to voice aloud. Now, he said slowly, I find myself standing in a hallway, looking at a soldier who moves like a ghost through every room he enters, who flinched today, during a ceremony he had no personal reason to flinch during, and who has spent 3 years quietly avoiding every single conversation that comes anywhere near a system most people have already forgotten. He pushed off from the wall and stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. I am not asking you to confirm anything, he said. Not yet, but understand this. Whatever happened at Kess Reach, I do not carry hatred for it. I carry questions. And soon, so will everyone else on this ship, whether you choose to answer them or not. He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving me standing alone in the quiet hallway, the weight of everything pressing down harder than it ever had before. I returned to my quarters that night and sat for a long time without moving, staring at nothing in particular, replaying every name I had heard read aloud during the ceremony. 12,000 names, 12,000 lives, that ended because of choices made in the chaos of a single desperate battle. I did not regret what I had done at Kess Reach. Given the same impossible choice again, I believed I would make the same decision, because the alternative had been the death of everyone in that convoy, including children who had done nothing wrong except exist on the wrong side of a war they never chose. But regret and grief are not the same thing, and standing in that assembly hall, hearing those names spoken one by one, I had finally understood the full size of what I carried. Grace contacted me later that night, her expression tense on the small screen of my communicator. I heard about the meeting with the princess, she said. How much does she know? Not everything, I said. But she is close, closer than either of us expected this soon. Grace was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Command is not going to be pleased about this timing. There are still delicate negotiations happening regarding trade routes along the border. If this comes out wrong, it could unravel months of careful diplomatic work. I understand the risk, I said. But Grace, I do not think I can keep dodging this much longer. She deserves to know the truth, especially after today. Grace studied me through the screen for a long time, before finally sighing, the sound heavy with reluctant agreement. I will speak with command, she said. See what latitude they are willing to give you. But Ethan, whatever happens next, you need to understand something clearly. Once this truth is spoken aloud, there is no taking it back. The princess who hears it will not be the same person afterward. Neither, I suspect, will you. I nodded slowly, staring past the screen toward the small window, where the stars continued their endless, silent journey across the black. I know, I said quietly. I have known that for 3 years. The communicator screen went dark, and I sat alone once more in the quiet of my small quarters, feeling the weight of an old secret finally beginning to lift free from the ground where it had been buried for so long, ready, whether I was fully prepared or not, to rise into the light. 3 days passed before Zareth summoned me again, and in that time, the ship around me seemed to hold its breath. Word of the private meeting had somehow spread among the officers, whispered between shifts, passed along in careful glances whenever I walked past a gathering of crew members. No one confronted me directly. No one needed to. I could feel the questions building in the air like pressure before a storm. Grace managed to secure limited authorization from command, a narrow window of permission allowing me to share what I judged necessary, so long as I avoided specific tactical details that remained classified for broader security reasons. It was not full freedom, but it was enough. The summons came late in the evening, delivered by a young Velkaran attendant who simply told me the princess wished to see me in her private study, alone, at the next hour. I dressed carefully, though I could not have told you why it mattered, and made my way through the familiar hallways toward the upper decks. Zareth's private study was smaller than I expected, lined with shelves holding physical books, an old-fashioned touch that surprised me, given how advanced the rest of the ship appeared. She stood near a wide desk, her formal robes replaced with simpler clothing, her hair loose, instead of the elaborate style she wore during court appearances. She looked younger like this, less like a princess, and more like a person carrying an enormous weight she had not chosen for herself. Sit, she said, gesturing toward a chair across from her desk. I sat, and she remained standing for a long moment, staring at me with an expression that held none of the mockery I had seen during our first meeting in the Grand Hall. "I have spent 3 days thinking about our last conversation," she said finally. "About the names I read during the assembly. About the way you flinched, and the way Commander Vosk looks at you now, like a man trying to solve a puzzle he is afraid to finish." She moved around the desk and sat across from me, folding her hands together, her storm-colored eyes steady on my face. "I am not asking you as a princess tonight," she said. "I am asking as someone who watched her father grow quiet and distant every year, on the anniversary of a battle he never spoke about. I am asking as someone who has spent her entire life surrounded by a grief she was never allowed to fully understand." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me what happened at Kess Reach," she said. "Not the official report, not the version written for treaties and history books. I want to know what you know." I sat quietly for a moment, feeling the weight of 3 years of silence pressing against the words I was finally about to say. Somewhere behind me, I could almost hear Grace's voice reminding me of the careful boundaries I needed to keep, the tactical details that had to remain unspoken. But the shape of the truth, the human center of it, that much I could finally share. "I was there," I said quietly. "I flew the strike that broke your father's fleet." The room went completely still. Zareth did not move, did not speak, though I saw something flicker behind her eyes, something between shock and a strange, aching relief, the feeling of finally hearing a truth you had suspected for a long time, but had never allowed yourself to fully believe. "Continue," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was a human convoy," I said. "Civilian ships, mostly. Families being evacuated from a colony that was about to fall under Dominion control. Your father's armada found them near Kess Reach, and moved to block every path out. We were sent to protect them, a small strike group against an entire armada. It was not meant to be a fair fight." I paused, gathering the strength to continue, the memories rising sharper now than they had in years. "I do not know exactly why I survived when so many others did not," I said. "I have thought about it every day since, and I still do not have a good answer. What I can tell you is that I made a choice in the chaos of that battle, a choice that broke through your armada's formation and ended the fight before they could destroy the convoy." 12,000 souls, Zareth said quietly. "That is what my father's fleet cost you to save a handful of colony ships." "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the weight of the word. "And I have carried that number every single day since it happened." Zareth stood abruptly and walked toward the wide window at the far end of her study, staring out at the stars, her back to me, her shoulders rigid with tension I could feel even from across the room. "My father commanded that fleet from a command vessel far behind the main formation," she said, her voice tight. "He survived. Admiral Korath did not. 12,000 soldiers under his command did not. And my father never spoke of it again, not once, not even to me." She turned back to face me, and I saw tears standing unshed in her eyes, held back by sheer force of will. "I grew up believing my people lost that battle, because we were simply outmatched," she said. "Because humanity had some hidden advantage we never understood. I built an entire understanding of the war around that belief, an understanding that let me stand in a hall and mock your people as soft and lucky, when the truth is that one of you broke an entire armada nearly single-handedly, and somehow lived long enough to stand in front of me and let me insult you without saying a word in your own defense. I did not tell you because it was not my place to announce it," I said. "Not in a room full of your court, not as a way to prove a point or win an argument. What happened at Kess Reach was not a victory to me, Princess. It was a nightmare I survived. There is no pride in it, only grief and the weight of choices no one should ever have to make." Zareth stared at me for a long moment, something in her expression shifting, softening, the careful mask of royal composure cracking just enough to show the person underneath, someone young and uncertain, carrying a grief she had never fully been allowed to name. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked quietly. "Because you deserve the truth," I said, "especially after the ceremony. I stood in that hall and listened to you read 12,000 names, and I realized I had spent 3 years hiding from a grief that belonged to your entire people, a grief I helped create. That is not something I can keep hiding from any longer, not from you, not after everything I have seen you carry." She was quiet for a long time, turning back toward the window, staring out at the stars once more. Commander Vosk suspected you almost immediately, she said finally. He recognized something in the way you carried yourself, though he could not explain exactly what. Threll found gaps in your records that should not have existed, and I read those 12,000 names, and watched a stranger at the back of my hall flinch like he had been struck. She turned back to me, her expression complicated now, layered with grief and something else, something I could not quite name. I mocked you, she said, in front of my entire court. I called your people soft and lucky, and the entire time, I was standing in front of the very person who broke my father's fleet, who ended a war that could have destroyed both our peoples if it had continued much longer. You did not know, I said. You could not have known. That does not erase what I said, she replied, her voice sharp with something close to shame. I judged your people based on nothing but old prejudice and inherited grief, without ever once considering that the story I believed might be incomplete. Most people judge based on incomplete stories, I said. It is not unique to you, Princess. I have made the same mistake more times than I care to admit. She studied me for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted again, the sharp edges of her earlier composure softening into something more thoughtful, more careful. Why did you not correct me? She asked. In the hall, that first day. Why did you simply smile and let me continue believing whatever I wished? I considered the question carefully before answering. Because power that has to announce itself is not real power, I said. I did not need your court to know what happened at Kess Reach in order for it to be true. What happened there happened whether anyone in that room believed it or not. I did not smile because I wanted you to feel small, Princess. I smiled because I understood something you did not yet know, and I found a strange kind of peace in that quiet understanding, even while you mocked me in front of everyone. Zareth was silent for a long moment, absorbing that answer, turning it over in her mind, the way someone examines an object from an unfamiliar angle. I do not know what to do with this information, she admitted finally, her voice quieter now, less guarded. It changes everything I thought I understood about the war, about my father, about your people, and about you specifically. You do not have to decide anything tonight, I said. The truth does not require an immediate response. Sometimes it simply needs to be spoken, so it can finally stop hiding in the dark. She nodded slowly, though the weight in her eyes had not lifted, and likely would not lift for a long time to come. We sat together in that quiet study for a while longer, neither of us speaking, the silence between us different now than it had been before, heavier in some ways, but somehow also lighter, the way a room feels after a long-held breath is finally released. Eventually, she rose and walked me to the door, her hand resting briefly on the frame as I stepped through it. This conversation does not leave this room, she said quietly. Not yet. I need time to think about what this means, for myself, and for the Dominion. I understand, Princess, I said. She studied my face one last time before I left, something unreadable passing behind her storm-colored eyes. Ethan, she said, using my name for the first time since we had met. Thank you. For finally telling me the truth, even knowing what it might cost you. I nodded and stepped out into the hallway, the door sliding shut quietly behind me. I stood there for a long moment, breathing slowly, feeling the strange mixture of relief and uncertainty that comes from finally setting down a weight you have carried alone for far too long. Whatever happened next, the truth was out now, at least between the two of us, and truths, once spoken aloud, have a way of shaping everything that follows, whether we are ready for it or not. Secrets on a warship do not stay secrets for long, no matter how carefully they are guarded. I do not know exactly how the story spread, whether it came from a servant who overheard something through a door, or from Threll piecing together the final fragments of his investigation, or simply from the way people had already begun to suspect the truth long before it was ever spoken aloud. Within a week, everyone on that ship knew who Ashfall really was. I felt the shift immediately. Some of the younger officers began watching me with a kind of nervous curiosity, the way people look at something they have only heard about in stories, never expecting to see it walking through their own hallways. Others avoided me entirely, unable to reconcile the quiet, unremarkable human they had grown used to seeing with the pilot responsible for one of the greatest losses in Dominion military history. And a few, a small but dangerous few, grew angry. I first noticed it during a routine supply run through the lower cargo deck, a part of the ship I rarely had reason to visit. 3 Velkaran crew members stood near the far wall, watching me with expressions that carried none of the careful neutrality most of the crew had learned to show me. One of them, a broad-shouldered engineer with hard eyes, stepped forward as I passed. "You," he said, his voice low and tight with barely restrained anger. "The human they call Ashfall." I stopped, keeping my posture calm despite the tension immediately rising in the air. "I did not choose that name," I said carefully. "It was given to me by my squadron." "My brother served aboard the flagship of the Third Armada," the engineer said, stepping closer. "I have not seen him in 3 years, because you decided his life meant less than a convoy of strangers." The other 2 crew members stepped up beside him, forming a loose semicircle that left me with limited room to move. I felt the old training kick in automatically, my weight shifting slightly, my eyes tracking exits and distances without conscious thought, even as I kept my voice level and calm. "I am sorry for your loss," I said. "I mean that honestly. I have carried every name from that battle with me for 3 years, whether anyone believed that or not." "Sorry does not return him to me," the engineer snapped, his hand curling into a fist at his side. Before the situation could escalate further, a sharp voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Stand down." Commander Vosk strode into the cargo deck, his presence immediately shifting the balance of the room. The engineer hesitated, clearly torn between his anger and the deep respect owed to a decorated commander, before finally stepping back, though the hostility in his eyes did not fade. "This is not the way," Vosk said firmly, addressing all 3 crew members directly. "Whatever grief you carry, whatever anger you feel, this is not how we honor those we lost. He is the reason they are gone," the engineer said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion he could no longer fully control. "He is also the reason an entire war did not continue for another decade," Vosk said, his voice quieter now, though no less firm. "I was there, at Kess Reach. I watched that battle unfold, from a support cruiser, at the edge of the formation, and I have spent 3 years trying to make sense of what I saw. I do not say this lightly when I tell you that if that battle had gone differently, if the human convoy had been destroyed as planned, the war would have escalated far beyond anything we can imagine. More fleets, more losses, an endless cycle of retaliation neither side could have survived unbroken." He looked directly at the engineer, his expression softening slightly with genuine understanding. "I do not ask you to forgive him," Vosk said. "Grief does not work that way, and I would never insult your loss by pretending it should. But I ask you to remember that the person standing in front of you did not choose this outcome out of malice or ambition. He was a young soldier, given an impossible choice, the same as your brother was, the same as every soul lost that day." The tension in the room did not fully disappear, but it eased enough for the moment to pass without further incident. The engineer stared at me for a long moment, his eyes still heavy with unresolved grief, before finally turning and walking away without another word, his 2 companions following close behind. Vosk turned to me once they were gone, his expression tired but steady. "That will not be the last time something like this happens," he said. "Grief does not disappear simply because the truth comes to light. If anything, the truth sometimes makes the grief sharper, more immediate." "I understand," I said. "I do not expect forgiveness from everyone." "Good," Vosk said, "because you will not receive it from everyone. But you will find, I think, that more people understand than you might expect. War is rarely as simple as the stories told about it afterward. Most of us who live through it understand that better than anyone." He studied me for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, the last remnants of suspicion finally settling into something closer to respect. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I do not blame you for what happened that day. I blame the war that made such an impossible choice necessary in the first place." He gave me a short, formal nod, the kind of gesture reserved for someone he considered an equal, before turning and walking away, leaving me alone in the cargo deck with my thoughts. Over the following days, the tension around me slowly began to shift into something more complicated, but ultimately more hopeful. A handful of officers remained cold toward me, their grief too fresh, too personal to overcome easily, and I did not blame them for that. But many others, particularly the older veterans who understood the true weight of war better than anyone, began treating me with a quiet, careful respect I had not expected to receive. Small gestures at first, a nod in the hallway that had not been there before, a moment of held eye contact between soldiers who understood something about survival that could not easily be put into words. Slowly, the walls that had stood between myself and the Velkaran crew since the day I first arrived on this ship began, piece by piece, to come down. Princess Zareth summoned me once more, nearly 2 weeks after our private conversation in her study, though this meeting felt different from the moment I walked through her door. She stood near the same window as before, dressed in simpler clothing, her expression calm in a way I had not seen from her before. "I have spoken with my father," she said, without turning around immediately, "about Kess Reach, about you." My stomach tightened slightly. "And what did he say?" She turned to face me, her expression thoughtful. "He confirmed everything you told me. He has known your identity for quite some time, longer than either of us realized. It seems your own command shared certain details with the Dominion leadership shortly after the treaty was signed, under strict conditions of secrecy, meant to protect the fragile peace between our peoples." I absorbed that information slowly, surprised, despite everything I had already learned. He never said anything. Neither did I, until recently. Zareth said, "Some truths are held carefully, released only when the moment seems right, or when they can no longer be contained." She paused, studying my face carefully. "He told me something else as well, something I did not expect to hear." "What was that?" I asked. "He said that the day he learned who had broken his armada, he felt something he had not expected to feel," she said. "Not hatred, though he searched for it, believing it would be simpler to carry. What he felt, more than anything, was a strange kind of respect. Respect for a young soldier who made an impossible choice under impossible pressure, and who carried the weight of it quietly, for years afterward, without ever using it to claim glory or advantage." She walked closer, stopping just a short distance from where I stood. "I understand that feeling now," she said. "I spent our first meeting mocking you, believing your survival was nothing more than fortunate circumstance. I know now how wrong I was. What I witnessed instead was strength I did not have the wisdom yet to recognize." "You could not have known," I said again, the same words I had offered before. "Perhaps," she said. "But I could have chosen kindness regardless, even without knowing the full truth. That is a lesson I intend to carry forward, whether it concerns your people or my own." She extended her hand toward me. A gesture I had learned during my time on this ship was reserved for moments of genuine respect between equals, rarely offered by someone of her rank to someone of mine. "I would like to propose something," she said. "A formal alliance between your government and the Dominion, built not on the fragile terms of an old treaty forced by circumstance, but on genuine partnership between our peoples. I believe understanding what truly happened at Kess Reach, the full weight and cost of it, could help build something far stronger than the peace we currently share." I took her hand carefully, surprised by the strength of her grip. "I would be honored to support that, Princess." "Zareth," she corrected gently. "I believe, after everything we have shared, formality feels somewhat unnecessary between us now." I allowed myself a small smile, the first genuine one I had felt in weeks. "Zareth," I repeated. "I would be honored to support that." Over the following months, the alliance she proposed slowly began to take shape, built carefully through countless meetings, negotiations, and moments of hard-won understanding between two peoples who had spent far too long defined only by the war that once separated them. It was not a simple process. Old grief does not vanish overnight, and there remained those on both sides who struggled to fully accept the changing relationship between our worlds. But slowly, piece by careful piece, something new began to grow in the space where old hostility used to live. Commander Vosk became an unexpected ally throughout the process, using his standing among the veteran officers to help ease tensions whenever old wounds threatened to reopen. Threll, once tasked with uncovering my secrets, eventually became one of the strongest advocates for the growing partnership, understanding better than most how dangerous unspoken truths could be if left to fester in silence. Grace remained cautiously supportive throughout, though she reminded me often that peace, once built, still required constant careful maintenance, the same as any structure meant to bear significant weight over time. As for Princess Zareth and myself, something quietly meaningful grew between us over those months, built not on grand romantic gestures or dramatic declarations, but on the simple, steady foundation of mutual respect earned through honesty, patience, and a shared understanding of grief that few others could fully comprehend. I still think about Kess Reach often, the weight of those 12,000 names never fully leaving me, nor do I believe it ever should, but I no longer carry that weight entirely alone. Zareth carries a portion of it with me now, understanding it not as a soldier who lived through the battle, but as someone who lost family in it, who grew up in its long shadow, and who chose, in the end, to build something better from its ashes, rather than allowing old grief to define everything that came after. There is an old saying among my people, one my grandfather used to repeat often when I was young: respect is not given by rank or title, it is paid for, slowly and carefully, through what a person is willing to risk, to lose, and ultimately to give, for the sake of something greater than themselves. I believe, standing now at the edge of a new and fragile alliance between two peoples who once tried desperately to destroy one another, that both Zareth and I finally understand the true meaning of those words. The stars outside my window continue their same slow, silent journey they always have, indifferent to the wars fought, and the peace slowly rebuilt in their endless light. But somewhere among those distant points of light, a small graveyard of broken ships still drifts quietly through the void, a permanent reminder of everything lost and everything since gained. I no longer smile quietly to myself the way I did that first day in the Grand Hall, carrying a secret meant only for my own private understanding. Now, when I smile, it is shared openly, with a princess who once mocked me without knowing the truth, and who chose, once she learned it, to build something better, rather than allowing old grief to win. That, I have come to believe, is the truest measure of strength either of our peoples has ever shown.